Okay, let's talk about water ratios and transparency. Do not skip this class because this is the most crucial class to teach you how to control the amount of water on your brush, paper, and mixing the paint. So first up, we have a milky, very saturated wash. Look at the consistency of the paint. It is almost dry, it doesn't move as well on wet on dry, and wet on wet, it moves, but just barely. This is good for painting tiny details or just dropping in a little bit of extra contrast. Next up, this is where most of your consistency will live. We call this buttery or mid-tone. As you can see, wet on dry, it applies really beautifully. And wet on wet, it moves a lot faster, but not too much. Last, we have very watery or transparent. We usually use this for the first wash. As you can see, it just moves so nicely wet on dry, and wet on wet, it almost moves too fast. Okay, so let's make a transparency chart. Now what you're going to do is use the paint almost as dark as if it comes out of the tube. Just paint a little box and then drop in a little bit of water and start to see how transparent you can get your paint to be. Normally with other paints you would mix in white, but with watercolor you would mix in water, and that's what makes the paint become lighter and lighter. Let's look at the water on the brush. We have a very soaked brush, and then we have a wet brush. We'll use a wet brush the most often. Damp brush is where there's still a little bit of water on it. Some lifting, it will be done with a damp brush. And finally we have a dry brush. This exercise will teach you how to control the water, both on the paper and on your brush. It totally changed the way that I viewed watercolor because I finally felt in control. So first thing you want to do is break your watercolor paper into 3 sections. I've done this by using paper tape. What I'm going to do for this exercise is paint a house. So first we're going to use wet on dry. That means we're using dry paper and a wet brush. So first up, I'm doing wet on dry with a soaked brush. But as you can tell, the consistency is more along the saturated side. So even though my brush is soaked, the paint is quite thick and it does not necessarily move as smoothly as you would assume. Next up, I'm using a wet brush, and the consistency of the paint is more along the lines of buttery mid-tone. So it moves quite quickly and quite easily along the paper's surface. Next up, I have a dry brush. As you can see, immediately the brush starts to break up. It's not very easy to cover the entire space, and it takes a few tries before I can finally fill up the entire box. So what I want you to do is do this exercise and start to notice the differences, putting down different types of consistency. Notice how much easier or how much more difficult it is when you're using a soaked brush or a dry brush. Okay, next up we're going to be using wet paper. I'm painting all 3 boxes, and we're going to let the paint dry at different stages. So the first stage, we have soaked paper with a soaked brush. Because my surface is flat, the paint is not really moving around, but after some time, it just blends in with the background and it's gone. You cannot see what I have tried to put down. Next, we're going to use wet paper. I've let the water settle in just a little bit. As you can see, I don't have these pools of water as on the soaked paper. And the brush I'm putting in is going to be a wet brush. The consistency is buttery to mid-tone. Putting down the first layer, it was not really dark enough, so I put down a second layer, but using the same type of brush. Just watch how the paint moves. It doesn't move as much, and it will retain its shape because there's less water on the paper for the paint to move around. Next up, we have damp paper. It is damp to touch, but it is not glistening and shiny like the other two sections. And for this exercise, I'm going to use a very soaked brush and paint the same shape. And immediately you can see the paint start to travel outside of the shape that I want. Watch at how quickly the paint travels on the paper. The longer I leave it, the more it's going to travel outwards.